Welcome back to the show. Right, honestly, this is one of those ones where I'm quite annoyed. I really am. This is absolutely terrible. This is the sort of thing that eats a company really alive, right? The idea of, the rot starting from the inside. And it does appear to be happening here. It appears to be happening to Blizzard Entertainment, which I suppose is hardly a surprise. Though what is interesting is that the central figure in today's story is at least very much under the impression that this is a very top-down situation from Activision Blizzard King, right? ABK, also known as Activision Blizzard, which is, the overall company that was formed after, a whole bunch of corporate history, let's just say. That's, of course, the reason why Bobby Kotick, is running the company that owns Blizzard. This has led to quite a problem, though. So, World of Warcraft Classic is extremely important to Blizzard Entertainment. In the times where World of Warcraft was struggling through Shadowlands and through BFA, WoW Classic was there really putting out the numbers. I remember a time during BFA where World of Warcraft had not particularly great seeming sentiment, and we find out that subs or whatever, essentially nearly double with the launch of Classic. An incredible thing that shows how important Classic is. And now, one of the leads of Classic has, perhaps been fired. But not being fired for a job performance reason. I mean, technically he's been fired for job performance, but it's more because there was orders that he didn't believe in that he refused to carry out. This story was broken by Jason Schreier of Bloomberg. He said, one of the leads of World of Warcraft Classic has departed Blizzard in protest of the company's stack ranking system, saying he was forced to give an employee a lower evaluation than they deserved in order to hit a quota. Now, Blizzard has used quota-based sort of systems that essentially force managers to give around 5% of people a ranking of developing. Now, developing, you may hear that and think, oh, okay, that's just somebody who's new. No, it's like developing is like passing your exam, but just barely. It is not good. And if you are given that appraisal by your manager, you earn less money because you will get a smaller bonus. This is a position that some managers of some teams, I think, can be totally fine with. Maybe that can be a function of HR, but certainly it's a rough situation where somebody is hired as a technical lead and therefore is more involved in the code part of things, the engineering part of things, and suddenly they are being forced to select out of their peers the people who are going to get paid less. Now, there are, of course, times where people are not pulling their weight, and it would be unfair to those who do pull their weight for those bonuses to be equal. That I totally do understand. The problem is that if Brian truly, in this case, Brian Birmingham, the person who left, if he truly believed, right, that somebody did not deserve this rating, he was basically left with no way to not give them that rating because he was mandated to give people a bad rating. He did not have any choice, right? So this is quite rough. He apparently wrote a fiery email to staff that he refused to continue working for Blizzard after he was told to give a developing ranking to a successful employee, and he called on other leads and directors to protest as well. So the hope here is that what Brian did may catalyze some change within the company, but we do have to move forward a little bit. So the first thing, this was not leaked by Brian. Jason evidently found this out through his own sources. I imagine one of Jason's sources was a recipient of that email. That seems to me to be the most likely way that he would find out about this. So Brian said he wasn't intending on making it public, but apparently since it's news anyway, I'd at least like to set the record straight. I'm no longer an employee of Blizzard Entertainment, though I would would return if I was allowed to, so that I could fight the stack ranking policy from the inside. I'm told the forced stack ranking policy is a directive that came from the ABK level above Mike Ybarra. I don't know for sure, but I suspect it's true. Everyone at Blizzard I've spoken to about this, including my direct supervisors, expressed disappointment about this policy. And he says, if you recall correctly, the first year we were asked to meet a specific quota of developing ratings was in the 2020 evaluations across the winter of 2020-2021 IRC. This was the first year they tried to unify the review and appraisal systems across all three child business units. So really, this is quite bad, right? This is a blanket policy being applied everywhere. But just wait, because Brian does have more to say about Activision Blizzard and essentially what they put the developers at Blizzard under, all right? So apparently, they at Blizzard pushed back pretty hard in 2021 about this. Then the sexual harassment, whole situation happened. They felt that they were able to make a change to ABK policies, but essentially, no. He says that the realization there's still a minimum quota for developing, despite their objections and sternly worded letters, leads me to believe I was operating under illusion. I hope Blizzard's positive culture can overcome ABK's poison, but it isn't succeeding in doing that. So a situation, I suppose, where probably the majority of Blizzard people are very against this system. Maybe even would presume that Ybarra would be against this system, maybe would be trying to, to voice the concerns of his employees, but ultimately nothing positive has happened in terms of change there. And I think we can all see how this would be quite bad, right? It's totally fine for a situation where somebody gets a developing ranking if that fits. But the problem that Brian has is that because this is a massive policy that just comes up top from corporate, it's not exactly going to be one size fits all. And that is basically the problem. Now, the company may just view this forced 5% as something where some of them will be inaccurate, but a lot of them will be accurate. And if managers are forced to pick, then that will essentially force managers to pick the worst people, right? They will pick the least successful out of all the people that they think are generally successful and give them the developing ranking. So I would suppose that over, the years and years and years of iteration, ABK would think, right, so we're going to be cutting out the bottom while reinforcing the top. This will naturally lead to us having a very good company. But what it actually does is create situations like the one that Brian is in. Now, I understand that they maybe don't like the idea of people covering for their friends, right? You're too close to your team. You have to be able to have professional distance and give people a developing rating. And I mean, that should be true. People truly do deserve that rating. But again, it may not fit, right? It's one of those things. One size fits all rarely works. But if you want to hear a bit about Blizzard and ABK, well, Brian says, I will still play Blizzard games. The developers at Blizzard are amazing. Dragonflight and Wrath Classic are gems. Dragon Riding is amazing in Dragonflight, as is the Ulduar Raid, and the new Titan Rune dungeons in Wrath of the Lich King, which, from all that I hear, by the way, yeah, those Titan Rune dungeons are really, really smart. But ABK is a problematic parent company. They put us under pressure to deliver both expansions early. All right, so they were under pressure per this to deliver Dragonflight and Wrath Classic early. Yeah, there are ways in which you could tell. Dragonflight, I think, was pretty good for the majority of players. They did have server issues on launch, but it seems that those server issues were because of some of their encryption technology that they were trying for this expansion, and maybe that was the sort of thing that wouldn't exactly be picked up on until the game is deployed at scale. But when you actually look through the expansion itself, there are issues. Even a quick little example, Warlords of Draenor Time Walking came out, and when it did, the whole situation with gear scaling was so busted that people were absolutely creaming that stuff extremely quickly. So with Dragonflight, it's that situation where the core things have generally worked really well, and it is, I would say, one of the best expansions that they have put together. Straight up. And I know that is high praise, but I do mean it. That's not to say that it is not perfect. I mean, how many times has been that rock climbing quest as an example, where the foothold that actually gets you onto the rock climbing route doesn't spawn, therefore you just can't do that world quest, or other silly little problems, things that should not have launched the way that they did, like with the group loot system. There's quite a few specs that are currently just left behind. The devs are doing all they can to balance that now. They do have broadly a pretty aggressive patch cycle, so there is a lot of good there. But again, if they had a little bit more time to polish it, I think you could certainly argue that a lot of those problems maybe would not have existed. That said, I would say that you've got to balance that between, it is actually useful having your game out by a certain point in time. Maybe you want people to be able to play it during, the holidays or whatever. Hard to say. But yeah, they were pressured to deliver both the expansions early, and ultimately Dragonflight being pretty good, that is pretty much a testament to, I would say, developer effort, and, almost certainly a lot of people crunching because they did care about the product they were delivering. In addition to, it's literally their job. But overall, the sort of situation that does degrade a company over time. I mean, Blizzard still has seen fairly high employee turnover, and a situation like this where they are willing to lose a pretty damn key member of their team, one of the most public faces of WoW Classic. I mean, in one hand, you would say, well, that's not pragmatic from a community confidence perspective. And the other hand, you would say, well, just because somebody has a public image, that does not mean that they should, be able to just grandstand and not do the thing, which I suppose is why probably he protested. Probably had a meeting with HR, and probably when he refused to budge on the stacked ranking, probably then that's where he was told, like, well, if you're not going to do stacked ranking, that's what you need to do to work here, so you can't work here. That is at least my assumption based on how he said, like, he would come back if he could come back and then, like, fight the stacked ranking and that sort of thing. Now, this whole thing about ABK being a problematic parent company, that's true. I've heard, and I think in the Preach interviews, a lot of ABK stuff was, it was put into context. I would say that, yes, that's going to be quite true on day-to-day design features, like, say, the mission table in World of Warcraft or world quests. That's not really a case of ABK basically saying, hey, could you change the design to be like this? I think that's far more the developers trying to make a game that is engaging and then getting a little bit misguided in that. However, where I have continually heard issues that are ABK issues, it comes to things like funding. It comes to expectations of when things should be delivered. That sort of thing. The sort of thing that allows a Warcraft 3 Reforged to happen even when you ostensibly do have a enthusiastic and capable classic games team who, if given the time, would have released the proper product, right? That essentially is the issue. If you wanted StarCraft 3 or just more StarCraft 2 content, as I would, ABK is your issue there. So ABK, are they going around micromanaging game mechanics? Is it ABK's fault that maybe you're not happy with the state of your Retribution Paladin? Well, that's the interesting question. On one hand, if Blizzard had maybe 3 more months, perhaps they would have put in the class changes that they, based on some recent comments, do plan to deliver during this expansion. But is that a case of Bobby saying, no, you don't have time, screw the Rat Paladins? No, Bobby has no idea about that. This is going to be handled by somebody who reports to somebody who reports to somebody who reports to Bobby Kotick. And the reason that something isn't good is not because some retention-based day-to-day gameplay mechanic was mandated by ABK. It is far more that the limitations of the developers work within. That's what is set by ABK. And sometimes limitations can be good, sometimes they can be quite bad, and I think this is a situation of the latter. So yeah, have I heard much about Activision Blizzard getting involved in game mechanics and game design? No, absolutely not. Have I heard about ABK being a very bad influence on the organization and the downstream impacts of that impacting their games? Yes, that is what's going on. Now, to continue with this, so here's Chris. Chris runs Notorious, which is a Blizzard spin-out company. He was a senior designer on World of Warcraft, and I believe he announced his departure just before the launch of the Shadowlands expansion. So him and his team are now working on a core fantasy game of some sort. His follow-up here was ironic because stack ranking was once used at Microsoft, and then it was removed in 2013. In hindsight, it was seen as one of the main influences for Microsoft's lost decade. And that's kind of funny because Microsoft themselves may even own Blizzard soon. Yeah, exactly. Again, you can see how this would erode your company. Now, another thing that will erode your company, carrying dead weight and turning into a zombie corporation. I don't think anybody is advocating for that. It's more that stacked ranking often doesn't work and can be really problematic because it erodes the quality of your team. Right? It's a one-size-fits-all approach, and that is just not how you do something. I mean, when you're issuing mandates that will impact 50,000 employees, I mean, that's where you see this type of thinking, right? That's where you move away from a sort of devolved command, more modern, more agile, more flexible method of management. And it's where you go significantly more back to the days of, say, a World War I style management, where it is massive, all the big massive scale that kind of underplays the personal element of the people who will be implementing those plans. And you look at where I think decentralized command within a military setting has really taken off over time. And I think there's a lot there that should be thought about when it comes to the corporate side of things. I just have this suspicion that when you're looking at spreadsheets and you are thinking about steering this humongous ship with many thousands, 10, maybe 10,000 employees on it, well, you start thinking in a way that starts to discount the individual experiences of people working at your team. But the problem is, once you zoom into the resolution of, say, World of Warcraft department heads and leadership team, that's actually a fairly small number of people with a lot of responsibility. And if you then tell all of those people that they basically have got to give 5% a really bad review, well, you can see how that actually is something that'll have quite a sizable impact on a company and on the real humans who make the games. It's just that empathy with the real human level is lost when corporate leadership is so far away from the front line. And one of the things I feel like I'm constantly being forced to harp on and on and on about here is this problem of leadership being too far away from the front line. Right, that situation where who's going to know what's going on best in the, given details and particulars of shipping a certain feature on time? Is it going to be some suit, or is it going to be somebody who is in fact working on that thing and knows how it works and knows what it needs? It's going to be the latter. But the more that kind of perspective is discounted at a systemic level, then, well, the more fragile your company is going to be, right? The higher the chances of high-profile fuck-ups. For some more comment here from Valentine Powell, while I'm not happy with how this came out, which I just bring up there because there was initially quite a lot of comment that like, oh, wow, really, Jason, you didn't reach out to this guy? He could probably have a harder time getting a job if it is seen that he is the type that will do something like this. And it's one of those tricky things where it is newsworthy. So I think this being known about is good. As for specifically naming Brian in it, that's where it gets kind of tricky, because ultimately Brian did leave for those reasons. He was a fairly public developer, so whenever he, say his LinkedIn changes, people are going to start asking questions anyway, right? And they're going to sort of be able to put one and two together, albeit with far less of a megaphone. Now, it actually does transpire that Jason emailed him on his Blizzard account, which at the time had, been deactivated, and messaged him on LinkedIn, which I assume he didn't check in time, and Bloomberg went ahead. So perhaps there was an argument that Bloomberg could have done that article without saying it was him. Sort of hard to say. But to go on then, Valentine says that while there were several reasons he left, stack ranking was among my top reasons. It's a policy that is fundamentally damaging to team building. I sincerely hope that Blizzard changes its culture in meaningful ways, supports developers who bring amazing things to the teams they're on. Blizzard developers deserve better than an archaic system that doesn't take into account the diversity of how people work. I want Blizzard to be the place I believed it was when I started working there, and that is what you get. And he did say the guy in question is amazing. He's one of my favorite advocates for change at Blizzard and a constant source of inspiration whenever I felt overwhelmed. And we've seen similar very, very positive sentiment towards Brian from past work colleagues. So ultimately, this is one of those situations where, what does Blizzard gain by this? Well, as I think has been shown in quite a few other companies, this erodes a lot. I mean, hell, it erodes a lot of employee trust. And I think when you lose that, you're really in a sticky position when it comes to, when it comes to actually retaining employees, which has been a historical problem at Blizzard, especially in those more recent times. I mean, they've struggled with retention because of low wages, obviously because of all the things that have happened, throwing in more archaic systems like this that are coming from ABK, who quite literally are the bad guy. Right, they're absolutely going to be seen as that. It is absolutely no way to run successful teams, and I think for me, all of this is just risk. If you're eroding your team and undermining your staff and upsetting their sense of security in their jobs, and you're also I mean, committing psychic damage upon your team leads who perhaps don't like the idea of basically saying, hey, you get less money now, because that's what this review is actually tied to. And again, we're not saying that nobody here is saying that somebody who deserves a developing shouldn't get a developing, because it is what they deserve. The thing that is archaic about it is that there is a minimum quota, right? A quota of people who have to be in the bottom. But the thing there is, like, yeah, there's always going to be, say, a bottom 10%, 5%, 20%, whatever. But what matters is, relatively speaking, where are they? Because if you're at the bottom of a really, really effective team because, you're newer, you're still getting up to speed, that actually might be okay in terms of your career trajectory, It might be totally fine. What if the bottom is actually above average? All of these things where it's like you're almost applying this very standardized thing to teams that will not at all be standardized. I mean, it's a bit like the situation with Google, they laid off 12,000 employees lately, and a lot of those employees, do you know how they found this out, right? They found this out because their work login credentials stopped working at 3 a.m. And you've got people who've worked at that company for like 15 years who have been given the axe, and seemingly lots of pretty incredible talent being given the axe. Now, that's the sort of situation where from leadership, they're just going to say, right, we need 6% fewer staff. Let's do that, make the number smaller. But the problem then is when you distribute those orders, it's at such a scale that very broad policy like that is going to be splash damage. And that splash damage is not good, as evidenced by, I don't think it was the reason of Microsoft's lost decade. I think it's more seen as being one of the influences on that. I remember when they fired like all their test engineers. That was probably a mistake. And I mean, hey, look at the situation with 343 that I talked about on the channel yesterday. You probably noticed a fair amount of overlap here in terms of the points that I'm making, because, like, I guess I am pretty passionate about organizations, right? Org building, leadership, all those things are just very interesting to me. I don't know, maybe it's the RTS player in me coming out, but you look at 343, and that is a company that, well, it would have existed whenever Microsoft did have stack ranking. And I just wonder how much of the dysfunction of 343 Industries is inherited from this lost decade Microsoft. Because it seems that mostly the problem that people had with Microsoft is like, well, sometimes they're not even active enough at solving problems. Or, they're slow because they're willing to just wait on the game to be good. That's what they've said about so much of their upcoming slate. Yet it does seem that the remnants of that old culture perhaps existed at 343 to the point where Halo was obviously an untenable thing as a live service. This is the sort of thing that just erodes companies, and ultimately the people who loses are us. In this case, their refusal to budge means that Classic has lost a very, very capable member of its team that was very well known and liked within the community. That's their loss, and in time it may be his gain. While I'm sure there are some companies who would see this and be quite worried, I would like to think there are other companies that would see, oh, this is somebody who actually gives a shit. He'll probably be good. I mean, at least one of the things that I think is extremely important is dissent. Now, yes, you have to be on the same page to accomplish your mission, but there has to be room for dissenting opinion. That is what makes you better. And the people who are willing, like, even for all the criticisms of Steve Jobs, and there are many, but even with all of that, a lot of the times, people who would maybe challenge him. Now, I'm sure there's people who challenged him and very much got the wrong end of the stick, but at least the sort of myth goes that at least everybody thinks is relatively good, is that people who would, challenge him, provide pushback, be willing to just, do whatever to make the product really good, they would kind of be promoted because there is this sort of understanding and respect that, oh, somebody who's actually willing to disagree and not just be a yes man, well, they're probably going to be pretty good in their job. And that is absolutely, it's what you want to cultivate. Because, as a leader, if you only just take very pliant yes men who will just do whatever you say, you're not building an organization. You're hiring people you're unafraid of and think you can control, which is an incredibly narcissistic and terrible way to run a business. And it's the sort of thing that we see happen here. It's almost like the idea of, somebody gets a ministerial appointment because they're a politician, not because they have much in the way of relevant expertise, within the thing that they're a minister of. Like, you see this all the time in government, and I think within corporate governance, you see all of that happening as well. So this is just one of those things where, to be honest with you guys, the nerdy, boring shit about, like, team management in the modern workplace, that's actually really important, because the games that we love are built by teams, and if those teams are being serially set up for failure, then we don't get good shit. If you want to know why, say, Anthem was a big mess, a lot of that was really, really, really bad leadership, where people were being indecisive and wasting time and not settling in a vision. You want to know why 343 was a big mess? It had great staff. Evidently, there's loads of things in that game that show the competence that did exist within that team, but ultimately it comes down to leadership, who are leading them around in circles nowhere fast, while seemingly having a whole bunch of corporate bullshit getting in the way, like the rotating contractor policy. So whenever somebody says, oh, you know, fucking 343, they had 10 years, I mean, honestly, I would say yes, but let's be clear that that's not the staff. The staff's time is being misallocated and misused, and that's why those staff will think, well, yeah, 343 doesn't deserve me. I'm going to go somewhere else where all of this time that I've spent trading in my field is not going to be bloody wasted by some moron who barely knows what a fucking video game is. Which, to be honest, to me seems like the only way that some of these insane things happen in the industry. So that is the situation. That's it for today. This is more of a discussion topic prompted by a bit of breaking news. I always just want to try and, I don't know, preach the good word in terms of, in terms of management and stuff, because I think it's very easy to go around being like, oh, this team's shit, blah, blah, blah. But I think the thing that's actually useful is to talk about, like, why this shit happens, because if you want to understand why the political parties are annoying, if you want to understand why, say, I don't know, the news media is annoying, or why government feels dysfunctional, or just any of these things, well, ultimately it comes down to human organizations. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. A lot of the incentives that exist in and around them, and also the personal incentives that may have negative externalities on the organization, which is a lot of what we're talking about today, that ultimately is what drags our species down. And I don't know how I've got from World of Warcraft Classic to bad management being bad for the human species, but there you go. It is, and I think we all know that. So that's it for today's video. If you'd like to support what we're doing, our first game, The Pale Beyond, is coming out on the 24th of February 2023. If you want to support that, go ahead and wishlist it on Steam. You can also check out our trailer over on the Bellular Studios YouTube channel. So thanks for hanging out with me today. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, with more great news. So I'll see you next time.